This is my dissertation, which is written for readers aged 8 to 12 years. It's middle grade. It's a historical piece based on the Nazi invasion of Paris in June 1940, and it follows the attempts to save the animals at Paris Zoo before they're killed. It's called Charlotte Culpepper, Little Ships and Elephants. Chapter 1, An Ark of Animals, Paris Zoo, May 1940. Charlotte Culpepper's bedroom overlooked the corner of Paris Zoo. Over the trees she could see the giraffes and elephants in their enclosures. She could see them even better when she escaped. 12-year-old Charlotte would slide down the horse chestnut tree outside her window and sprint off to the zoo. Sometimes she'd hang like a monkey from the tree's branches, clasping binoculars to her parakeet green eyes. She didn't mind that everything was upside down. Today was a sunny Saturday in late May. Charlotte skidded to a halt by the giraffes. She remembered her father, Sir Ronald, speaking sternly at breakfast. "There's a world war coming, you mark my words," he had said. Charlotte had watched as his well-sprouted moustache wiggled. Some Frenchmen have already been called up into the army, and as we all know, on May the 10th, Hitler launched his invasion of this country, as well as Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Now, we all know, yes, her mother Helena replied sharply, while stirring her tea. People are already fleeing French towns. We've seen it in the newspapers, Ronald. You don't need to tell us. But my dear, he then spoke up, the Germans are in line to defeat the French army. They may well be marching towards Paris with their guns and tanks as I speak. Charlotte gulped and accidentally spilt her porridge. "Oh, do be careful, dear," Helena tutted. "Don't worry, Maman," Charlotte told her, her worried eyes suddenly a twinkle. "The 3 bears at the zoo can come and eat it." "Animals, nothing but animals on the brain. Animals fried, animals squared," Helena retorted, pursing her lips. She didn't look at all happy. Mrs. Beaumont, their housekeeper, had mopped up the spilt porridge. Charlotte caught her winking her way, entertained by the 3 bears' story. She never told on Charlotte for sneaking away to the zoo. Mrs. Beaumont's husband was a keeper at the Paris Zoo who looked after the bears and elephants. Charlotte looked back at the giraffes in their outside enclosure. She often decided that giraffes were her favourite animal. Today they were munching cabbages and acacia leaves. They loved them. They much preferred them to porridge. Their enclosure was near to a famous man-made rock, which was so tall its snowy tip could be seen for miles across Paris. It was called the Grand Rocher, or Big Rock. Charlotte could see them from her window if she stood on tiptoes. She could even spot the families of sheep and goats living upon it. She felt sure the reason they cast their eyes down upon the visitors was to make sure everybody was behaving themselves. The zoo was busy. People seemed determined to carry on as normal, despite the threat of the invading German army. Charlotte watched the crowds of visitors, families, and zoo workers were mingling, with children excitedly pointing at the animals and calling to their parents when they reached a new enclosure. Everybody seemed to be dressed in a hat. A sea of hats floating along, thought Charlotte, just like seagulls upon the sea. Many visitors were standing near Charlotte and studying the giraffes from behind low metal railings. She spent as much time as she could in the zoo, and she much preferred it when it was quiet. She could talk to the zookeepers much more easily. She could ask them anything she liked about their animals. They didn't always know the answer, but Charlotte didn't always ask easy questions. "Can giraffes skip?" she'd ask Mr. LaRue, their head keeper. "And how much would it cost me to borrow one? I want to keep one in my garden and spy on the neighbours over the fence. They could also look for Germans." She was still waiting for the answers. She was too late to help feed the giraffes today, but she didn't mind. There would be other animals who knew it was time for lunch. Sometimes the keepers let her dish out bananas to the chimps and carrots to the elephants, which she loved. Charlotte had never been allowed to feed the lions, though. Perhaps children were too tasty. She now ran round the zoo, weaving her way through the visitors. She wanted to check on all the animals and pretend to catch up with all their secret gossip. Perhaps they'd heard some war news, she thought. After all, their eyes and ears were always open to the hundreds of visitors a day. There were birds and bats, fish and pheasants, and aardvarks and antelopes. Charlotte even classed the ants about her feet as zoo animals. She'd watched them snaking about like steam trains as they ran along the fences. They didn't seem scared of any other animal, even the lions. "I want to take you home with me," she whispered, looking at a cute baby monkey. "But I won't, because you need to be with your mother. And my parents wouldn't be too happy about you swinging from the chandeliers. I'll try and save you if I can, though, if the Germans come.
Thanks very much, Abby. And our next reader, who's studying fiction, is Rebecca Hemmons.
This is my piece that's part of my dissertation, which is going to be an escape room, so a bit different to a normal sort of creative writing piece. 1530, that was when she finished school. Your beautiful little blue-eyed and blonde-haired girl, Carletta. You knew this. She would walk home and stop by the sweet shop with a couple of pound coins she had left over from the lunch money you had given her. She tried to keep this secret, but you always knew she did it and didn't have the heart to tell her off. You worked long hours so you wouldn't get home until 6. You had a babysitter waiting in the house for her, but Carletta didn't turn up. 1700. That was when you got the phone call. You were going to be getting off work in half an hour, but this was important. The sitter had waited and waited, but the child had never turned up. The murmur of your colleague became even more distant as you turned them out. Missing. The phone clattered to the floor and you rose from your seat. You could hear the constant apologies and concerns coming from the sitter on the phone, and your colleague had now become silent. Your face was pale, and he put his hand on your shoulder. You shook your head and began tidying up your things. You needed to get home. Now. You threw each item into your bag. The papers crinkled up, and that would normally irk you, but you did not care at this point. You threw the laptop in with the charger and did not care if the banging of the two would have cracked the screen of the laptop. You threw it over your shoulder and grabbed the phone from off the floor. I'm on my way, is all the response that you gave to the frantic girl on the phone. 1821. You looked at the clock in your car. Why was it taking so long to get home? You knew why, of course. Everyone was trying to get home. But you needed to get home. 1847. The police were already there, the girl having called them to try and help find the little girl. They looked at you with sorrow. No, it couldn't be. It just couldn't. The last thing you had left in this world. 1850. A police officer came over to you. He was speaking, but you couldn't make out any words. He handed you something. It plopped into your hand. A pound coin and 2 20-pence pieces, along with a small charm off of a bracelet. A charm of a teddy bear. They were hers, but she couldn't be found.
And our final current student reader is Lottie McLean, who's studying young adult fiction at the moment.
Hello, I am Lottie. This is a extract from a short story that I wrote, which is basically about a teenage girl that's not having a very good day. But yeah, and I'm sorry it's on my phone. It doesn't look very good, but I forgot to print it off in time. Bloody hell, Scarlett, get up, she says, but with zero enthusiasm. I wish she would pick up a slipper or a pair of pants to dash at me, like she normally does. I can't hear her stomping about like she should be. Lately she just shuffles and mumbles. I left the bathroom light on all night last night and she doesn't say a word. I hear her just flick it off. I don't like that. She should be going mad. Scarlett, she should be screeching. What have I told you? Or something sarcastic like, take it you're paying the bills now then. That was Mum. Stressy, bossy, loud and funny. That was Mum. I don't know what's happened, but something must have, because she's gone so weird and quiet. I swear I watched her stir the same cup of tea for about 10 minutes straight yesterday, staring out the window, looking like some kind of artificial intelligence stuck on the same function. I reach up to the curtain from my bed and pull it back a little to let the daylight in. Well, what there is of it. February mornings in Aspley are hardly glorious. Maybe that's what's getting to Mum. I heard her talking to her friend last night. It's like there's a big black cloud following me round and I can't shift it. And then she cried again. Her friend didn't say much, just that stuff people say that doesn't really mean anything, like, keep going and you've got this. I come downstairs and she sat at the table, looking out the window again. I've got a weird heavy feeling in my tummy. Not sure if it's because of Mum or something I've eaten or what. I really want to hug her, but I'm a bit scared. I don't want her to start crying again. Bye, Mum, I say, grabbing an apple and 2 chocolate digestives for the road. I feel like I have to tell her what day of the week it is. Not sure she knows. It's Tuesday, so I'm training after school. I know, babe, she says. See you later on. Love you. She does know. Good. I give her a quick kiss and try to ignore how shiny her eyeballs are. I know there are fresh tears in there, but I have no clue how to stop them coming. I actually don't mind school once I'm there. I'm year 9 now and turning 14 in 3 months, but unlike a lot of girls my age, I don't want to grow up at all. Even the word no, seriously, I can barely say it. Puberty, gross, freaks me out. I don't want anything to do with it. Look, says Leela, stretching her arm out to show a beautiful and vaguely recognisable girl on her phone screen, probably from some reality series 3 years ago, adorned in underwear that fits so perfectly it almost can't be real. Oh my God, imagine AJ's face, says Chloe. You need to get that, says Jeannie, clicking her fingers. In it, Scarlett. She walks over and thrusts the screen in my face. I don't mind a bit of form room banter, but this isn't me at all. I think Jeannie knows that too. I've only just started wearing sports bras. My pants still have pictures of shooting stars or cats on them. I've never worn a thong in my life, let alone a satin red matching set. My tummy feels heavy and achy again. Maybe I need to go home. Yeah, it's nice, I say. She grins and cocks her head inquisitively. Are you a lesbian? She asks me. Chloe and Leela laugh. No, what the fuck? Sorry, it's just like, I've never really known you to get with anyone, and you dress a bit like a boy and stuff. It's cool if you are, chimes Chloe. Well, I'm not, I say. They all laugh again.
Right, well, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Kim Slater and Helen Cooper, who are going to be each giving you a short reading from their latest novels. Well, actually, not quite your latest novel, because you've got one coming out in a few weeks, but it's not quite ready yet. So your upcoming novel. And then I'll ask each of them 3 questions, then I'll ask both of them 3 questions, and then we'll turn it over to you, and we'll be finished around 8:30 at the latest, I would have thought, but that's to include time for you all to buy books, which we hope you'll be doing. Start with Kim. Kim actually studied at Trent between 2007, when she began her undergraduate degree, and 2012, when you finished your part-time MA in creative writing, from which you graduated with distinction, and almost immediately started publishing books, which is fairly amazing, I have to say.
Yeah.
And you're going to be reading to us, I think, from your new novel. You published both young adult novels, which have been shortlisted and won so many prizes. I'm not going to try and list them, and translated it into numerous languages. And also, you're a best-selling writer as K.L. Slater of crime and mystery fiction. So. Yeah. Do you want to start by giving us a bit of a reading?
I thought I'd do a little bit of a reading from Smart, and then a reading from my book. It's not actually my latest. I think I've written 3 after this one, but anyway.
Prolific as the word.
Yeah. So Smart was a book that started as a short story on my Writing for Children and Young Adults module, doing my MA. And I developed it. I was desperately wanting to get published. I did the MA to get an agent and to get published, because all my work had been rejected up until that point. So I wrote the book from the short story, and it's set in Nottingham. I thought it'd be nice just to compare it with one of the later books. So Kieran, he's 14 years old. He's comes from quite a dysfunctional home. He lives with his mum, his stepbrother Ryan, and his stepdad Tony. I went straight home after school. When I opened the kitchen door, Ryan jumped out from behind it and did a really loud, high-pitched scream right in my ear. Noises that loud always made me feel sick. He went into the sitting room and sat making up the little plastic bags, packing them into the toolbox, even though Tony wasn't there. "Make me a cup of tea, you freak," he shouted. I put the kettle on and I went upstairs. The dirty wash basket in the bathroom was overflowing on the bathroom lino. Mum was always at work and Tony never put the washer on. I took my school clothes off and I put on my tracky bottoms and a t-shirt. I had to put a jumper on too, as my room was freezing. I went back downstairs and made Ryan a cup of tea. He took a sip. "No sugar, dumbass," he said, and he spat it onto the floor. I'll have a cheese sandwich while you're in there. I took it back and put the sugar in. I did a bit of foamy spit and stirred that in too. It was a brilliant way to get Ryan back. I got out the bread and the butter and the cheese. I took the tea and the sandwich in. He took the plate off me and looked at the sandwich. What the hell is this? The filling's supposed to be inside the bread, you bleeping idiot. I wasn't going to stick around and put up with Ryan's bad mood. I had a better idea. It took me about 15 minutes to get to the lace market. In Victorian times, the lace market was at the centre of the world's lace industry. I got a leaflet from the tourist office on a school trip and it told you all about it. It's brilliant. It's only 15 minutes from my house. No one else in my class is interested in coming here, which is crazy. The buildings are massively high and made of red brick. They're mostly posh apartments now that you have to buzz to get in. But in the olden days, they were used as sales rooms and warehouses to make and store the lace. I walked up and down a couple of streets, just looking up and around me. There was nobody about, which is how I like it. The City Council call this area the Creative Quarter now. There's a big art gallery here, and I'm going to get some of my drawings hung on the walls when I'm older. It was easy to imagine you were an English gent and it was Victorian times. There are still the old railings and gas lamps around, which modern builders don't have now. People from all over the world came here to buy Nottingham lace, and now it belongs to me. I sat on a low wall in front of one of the apartments blocks. It was a good spot for looking up the street at the tallest buildings. I turned to a fresh sheet in my sketch pad and selected a pencil. In Salford, where Lowry lived, he used to sit and draw like me. During his lunch hour, he drew sketches of people and buildings on bits of paper. Sometimes he gave them to passers-by. I wasn't going to give my drawing away. Nobody around here would want it. But I knew how Lowry felt when he looked at the tall buildings that used to be warehouses and factories. They made you feel small and a bit scared, but somehow you still liked them and felt proud. Industrial areas, Miss Crane calls them. I started to sketch. I drew smoking chimneys and turned all the apartment blocks back into warehouses filled with the world's finest lace. I made the people tiny next to the industrial buildings. I blocked out the modern world and went back to Victorian times. Lowry always drew factories because not everyone lived in the countryside and had picnics. When you live in a city, you get to like the outline of dark buildings against the blue-grey sky. It's a different sort of beauty. He called these pictures industrial landscapes. I mixed up the real with the imaginary like Lowry did. I painted my own reality. So that's a reading from Smart. And Smart was published in 2014, and I wrote 3 more young adult books. I got an agent and a publisher before I graduated from my MA. And I was very lucky to get a contract with Macmillan Children's Books. So I wrote 4 young adult books. But as David knows, that when I did my BA, my dissertation was adult crime, which was my first love. It was just that I got into publishing through children's, which I did really love writing. And since then, I think The Marriage is my 14th adult psychological thriller, and number 17 is published tomorrow. It's called Missing. I'm with a digital first publisher called Bookerchaw, and they're part of Hachette. I'll just read you a little bit from... Okay for time still? Yeah. I'll just read you a little bit from The Marriage. So this book, we're in the realms of digital. So this book has now sold about 180,000 copies, and it was published last summer. So digital's another world, like I say. So this is a prologue of The Marriage. The tagline, by the way, is 10 years ago he killed my son. Today I married him. It's highly commercial. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my new ivory silk dress. Simple and classy, it skimmed my curves, but crucially remained demure in all the right places. I'd had a salon spray tan. My moisturised skin looked smooth and youthful, but when I pinched the top of my hand, the skin did not spring back immediately. I'd curled my hair and pinned it up, adding a tiny sprig of fresh gypsophilia here and there to soften my look, and applied a pretty pink lipstick, the latest spring shade according to the sales assistant at the department store makeup counter. Peering closer to the mirror, I studied my reflection. Tiny lines fanned out from the corners of my eyes and lips. My cheeks gave way to a soft sagging that spoiled the razor-sharp jawline I'd enjoyed in my 30s. In 2 years' time, I would be 50 years old. But age was just a number. Today, I felt young, vibrant and free. I'd planned this fresh start for what felt like a very long time. Today, I would start a new life with a man 20 years younger than me. In 1 hour's time, I would marry the man I loved. The same man who 10 years earlier had killed my only son. The Mansfield Guardian, 15th of October 2009. Man dies after one punch assault in town centre. An 18-year-old man has died after being taken to hospital in the early hours of this morning in a critical condition following assault outside a nightclub that led to a bleed on the brain. The incident happened just after 2 a.m. outside Movers nightclub and late bar on White Hart Street in Mansfield. The two men were ejected by security staff after a disagreement escalated between them inside the venue. The fatal assault then took place outside the rear entrance. The Guardian understands that Jesse Wilson was hit by a man known to him. Police have arrested another 18-year-old local man, a middleweight professional boxer who recently qualified for the East Midlands Boxing Championships due to be held in February next year. Police are appealing for witnesses. Any more?
No, that's fine. Thank you. So, shall we tell that?
Yeah, that'll be fine, thanks.
So there'll be plenty of time. There'll be plenty of time to ask questions about what you were just saying shortly. But first, we're going to hear from Helen. So, Helen, you were actually a student while she was a student, weren't you? But you were doing a full-time MA while Kim was in the last year of her undergraduate course. So your paths never crossed, although your works actually turned out to have quite a lot in common. So I read and enjoyed your first novel, The Downstairs Neighbour, which I know wasn't the first one you'd written, but it's the first one to come out last year, and we'll talk a bit about that later on. And it's done very well, and the second novel, Holiday to Die For, I just finished reading yesterday. It's called The Other Guest, and you're going to read a bit from it now.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, so as David says, I've written 2 psychological thrillers. I'm absolutely in awe of Kim and how many you've written. I hope to get there. So my first one, The Downstairs Neighbour, came out in February 2021, which seems ages ago now. So much has happened in the world. And that one was very much a kind of sort of claustrophobic domestic noir about people living in the same house and kind of overhearing snippets of each other's lives. And it's about families sharing a Georgian townhouse in London whose lives all very much intertwine and then unravel when the teenager from the top floor flat goes missing. And that one came out during lockdown, which kind of is quite apt in that its theme is quite a lot about people living in close quarters and overhearing each other and seeing glimpses and misunderstanding glimpses of each other's lives. But this one, as you can see, is quite a lot brighter and sunnier, although don't be fooled, there's still quite a lot of very dark stuff that happens. And in this one we have Leah, who is returning to Lake Garda, to the resort that her family owns there after her niece has mysteriously drowned in the lake. And when she gets there, her family are acting very oddly, and she begins to suspect that her niece's death was not the accidental drowning it's kind of been declared as. And there's another parallel storyline which takes place in Derby, slightly less glamorous than Lake Garda, where we have a character called Joanna, who's just started dating again after a big breakup. And things take a bit of an unsettling turn when the man she's only just started dating unexpectedly moves in with her after an incident, which I won't divulge. And she realises a bit too late that she doesn't quite know him well enough. And the two stories do start to connect, but again, I won't divulge how. So I'm going to treat you to Lake Garda rather than Derby today. So I'm going to read a passage from the second chapter when Leah first arrives back in Italy. The final stretch of Leah's journey had to be taken by boat. Small ferries, exclusive to guests of Il Mandarino luxury holiday village, departed every hour from the dock with the golden railings. The smartest, shiniest dock on this part of Lake Garda. Leah was the only person waiting there that afternoon, anxious and sweating in her weather-inappropriate black jeans. The glaring blue of the lake surrounded her on all sides. A rocky mountain reared out of the water to the north, looking almost muscular as the sun rippled over its curves and plains. Behind it, out of sight, lay the resort, waiting to reveal itself to those who were privileged enough to be staying there. Would her sister come on the ferry to meet her? Leah had told Charlotte what time she expected to arrive, but Charlotte had been typically vague about her intentions. Since landing, Leah had been on tenterhooks. Might she meet her at the airport, she'd wondered first. No, but there had been a man in mirrored sunglasses, holding a sign with Leah's name on, who'd whisked her into a plush, air-conditioned car and driven her to the small town of Malchesney, the last stop in reality before Il Mandarino. Stepping out into blinding sunlight, Leah had looked around for Charlotte again, before assuming she should head to the dock and hope for a ferry. It was unsettling not knowing at what point she would clap eyes on her sister after 2 years apart. It wouldn't have occurred to Charlotte that Leah might be nervous, that most people, especially Leah, like to have schedules and plans. Charlotte time, their dad used to call it, laughing fondly at his eldest daughter's ability to be hours late and not even appear to realise. Since moving to Italy and immersing herself in Il Mandarino, Charlotte seemed to exist even more in her own unfathomable world. At least she had done when Leah had last visited. To her shame, she didn't know who her sister might be now, how grief might have changed her. Leah reminded herself she was here to build bridges, to assess with her own eyes whether Charlotte was coping fine, as her strange, brief emails always claimed she was. Her gaze was tugged towards the centre of the lake, where the blue was darker and denser, where the water seemed to swallow the sunlight rather than bounce it into her eyes. Something dragged at her stomach, like a weight trying to pull her in. She gripped the golden railings of the dock, but they were scalding hot and she jolted back. At that moment, she spotted the ferry cutting a frothy path towards her, an orange and gold Il Mandarino flag streaming from its top deck. At the front stood a familiar figure, with long dark hair bannering in the breeze. Not Charlotte, as Leah misidentified her for a moment, but her daughter, Olivia, Leah's niece. Leah's other niece, as she couldn't help thinking of her now. The boat drew up, gleaming with water droplets and polished chrome, its tapered prow giving it the look of a miniature yacht. It was empty apart from the man driving it, also in reflective shades, and Olivia, wearing a pale orange shift dress and high strappy sandals. She stepped down carefully, her heavily made-up face composed in a smile. "Auntie Lee!" Olivia brushed Leah's cheek with a cool, perfumey kiss. "Welcome back." Leah swallowed, unable to speak. Her niece was greeting her as she'd been trained to welcome all guests of Il Mandarino, as if they were a temporary member of a special family. Except Leah was one of the family. It was just that only Amy had ever made her feel that way. As they sped away from Malchesney, Leah gripped the damp edges of her leather seat and stared around. She'd forgotten the gasping freshness of the air out on the water compared to the heat of the shore, how the lake narrowed and then dramatically widened so that the villages on opposite shores seemed flung apart. And she'd forgotten how, as you began to sail around the huge rocky outcrop that hid Il Mandarino from the rest of Lake Garda, there was the sense of a curtain being slowly drawn back. There was no mention of Amy during their journey. Olivia gushed about Il Mandarino, how much it had grown, a prestigious award they'd recently won. Silently, Leah counted the months since Amy's death. 9. To her, it was still savagely raw. She'd only just emerged from a paralysis of shock and finally felt able to come to Italy. But perhaps she shouldn't have expected everyone here to be constantly talking about Amy. Maybe life had to resume at some point, especially for a 17-year-old. I'm pretty much in charge of customer relations now, Olivia said, pinning down her hair against the wind. What about school? Leah asked. Or did you... Well, that's over for the summer. My tutor won't be back for 8 weeks, thank God. I can be all about Il Mandarino for the whole peak season. Leah felt a deep, uneasy pang. Even since her last visit, there was a ramped-up corporateness to Olivia's turns of phrase, her measured smile, the fact that her dress was the same shade of orange as the flag flying from the boat. The boat lurched and Leah slipped in her chair. She'd forgotten this bit too, the sudden direction change as the ferry cleared the outcrop and angled itself to approach the resort. At last, Il Mandarino dazzled into view. A dozen or so white buildings climbing one side of a lush mountain, fanning upwards from a private bay. Castle-like villas rose on stilts out of the greenery of the slope, and the sun flashing off the pools gave the impression that the whole place was glittering. It was hard to squint at it for any length of time, yet looking away wasn't easy either. Il Mandarino demanded your gaze. Leah's eyes travelled upwards. At the very top of the resort, the trees gave way to a craggy ridge, naked and almost brutal in contrast. A single cloud hovered like something that should have been airbrushed out. The ferry pulled up to a twin of the dock they'd just left, and a chauffeured golf buggy whizzed them up the path that snaked through the middle of the resort. Even as they rose, and the lake dropped away behind them, the villas were always taller, their white turrets shimmering in a haze of heat. Leah glimpsed some guests sat out on their balconies, sipping drinks beneath gold-trimmed umbrellas, their faces shrouded by sunglasses. Beside her, Olivia smiled and waved and scrutinised everything. That hedge needs trimming, she murmured, whipping an iPad from her handbag and tapping frantically. And God, that laundry really needs collecting from outside Casa del Fico. All Leah could really see was Amy, incongruous among the perfection, resisting it. She pictured her climbing a tree to see the world beyond her boundaries, running up the mountain in her frayed shorts and bikini kill t-shirt, shaking her head at each golf buggy that offered to pick her up. The family's large villa was at the top, overlooking the resort and the lake at its feet. Leah's eyes went straight to the first floor balcony, where Amy used to sit with her headphones on, music crashing in her ears, her parents barking at her to get changed or get inside if she wasn't wearing acceptable clothes. She would often text Leah from that spot, describing clouds and birds, whether the lake looked choppy or calm. Now the balcony was deserted. Leah battled to get a grip as they left the buggy, and Olivia exchanged a few words with the driver. Then they were walking between the thick white pillars of the villa's entrance, stepping into the abrupt coolness of its terracotta hallway. Passing from sun into shade, Leah was momentarily blind. It was only as her vision adjusted that the tall, slim figure of her sister took shape. Charlotte flung out her arms, bracelets clinking. "Lee, you're here." Leave it there.
Thank you. I suspect that the answer to this will be different whether you're working in children's and YA or adults. So I'll start with Kim, but just to repeat the question, it was, is it sensible, I think underlying implication is, in a commercial sense, the right is to stick to one particular genre and area. So Helen, I'll start with you and then I'll go back to Kim.
Okay. I think at first it is, this is just from my experience, so I think when you first start out, as I say, they like you to sort of stay in your lane if you're just establishing a brand, particularly with the genre I write in, I think suspense. I think if I suddenly, for my third book, wrote something completely different, they might be a bit like, whoa, this isn't what we kind of signed up for. But that isn't to say you can't have that discussion, particularly with your agent in the first instance. I think if you decided you wanted to explore a different genre, quite often people will use a different name, as you kind of had with your suspense books, to sort of signal that difference. So I think it is definitely a discussion that you can have, but I think while you're starting out and you're building a readership and building a brand, Certainly in traditional mainstream publishing, they quite like you to sort of stick with one thing to start with. But it's definitely, I mean, my agent's got authors on her books who have written in lots of different genres and done loads of different projects, and she's quite good, I think, at sort of facilitating that and thinking about the best way to do it. People even get published by different publishers.